Story 1. My girlfriend talks in her sleep. She's been saying the most horrible things recently. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. And it wasn't at a healthy level. Far from it. I would think about her every moment she was away. I would sometimes sit on my couch and just stare at my phone waiting for her to text. I'd tell myself, don't contact her. Don't. It will come off as too strong. But then I'd still find myself clicking her name on my contact list before my inner voice would continue. You don't want her to know how desperately smitten you were with her. It's unattractive. It will scare her off. No, you must wait for her to call you this time. But it was excruciating and exhausting. Almost unbearable. I once heard that the ancient Greeks believed that falling madly and irrationally in love with somebody was a curse that you would wish upon your enemies. I could never understand what they meant. After all, isn't falling head over heels in love the ultimate goal nowadays? But now that it's happened to me, I have to say, the ancient Greeks were right. This is a curse. I was barely in control of myself. Almost as though my infatuation with her had possessed me. The two of us were sexually active together, but still in the dating phase. We were at that make or break era of a blossoming relationship where we'd either have the talk and formally be in a relationship, or we'd start to slowly drift apart. The latter of which I don't think I'd be able to cope with. Honestly, I wouldn't be able to. Almost everything about her captivated me. The way she held her hand over her mouth when she laughed. How she'd caress the pendant of her necklace when she was frightened. How she'd twirl her hair in her finger when she was excited. All of it. Her smell. Her smile. Her eyes. Yeah, I know. It probably makes you sick reading about it. I feel the same way. I was never the hopeless romantic type. But now I can't stop fantasizing about her. I'd think about us doing the long 3-hour hike up to that magnificent view from one of our first dates. To that first kiss, as we overlooked the lights of the city. But this time I'd get down on one knee, bring out the ring, and, well, you know what would happen next. Alright, fine. I'll stop. Yes, this is a girl I'd only been casually dating for a couple of months. I shouldn't be thinking about proposing yet. I know that. I'm just barely able to control myself any longer. I feel as though I'm losing power over the decisions I make. And that brings me to why I'm here writing this out at the moment. It started with the first real thing that troubled me about her. We'd never actually spent a night together. No matter how late she was over, once either of us showed signs of being tired, she'd up and leave. She wouldn't leave awkwardly or in anger. Just a casual kiss goodnight, a smile, and a call me soon. It was something I didn't really even notice the first few times she did it. But after almost 8 weeks of dating, it was becoming strange. I'd have to ask her about it. It took drinking almost an entire bottle of wine before I had the courage to do it. She looked almost defeated when I asked and lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I knew this talk would come eventually, she started. She took in a deep breath with a long drawn-out exhale. Recently, she paused again. I've started talking in my sleep. She shook her head in embarrassment. It's called somniloquy. I looked it up. I shrugged and laughed out loud. My demeanor seemed to say that's it. No, Stephen, listen, she said. She wasn't laughing. It's bad. It's completely out of control. It's not just random words or gibberish. No. It's horrible. I say horrible, disgusting things. She was starting to raise her voice, breath heavy, and tear up. I approached her and held her. I told her it couldn't be that bad. I told her to spend the night. I told her she was probably exaggerating. I was wrong. That night she stayed at my house. But she warned me of something before falling asleep. Whatever you do, don't wake me up. It makes me really scared and disoriented if that happens. And don't respond to me. Just ignore it. I nodded and agreed. If it becomes too much, she continued, just leave the room and sleep on the couch. I won't mind. I told her not to worry about it. I told her that it wouldn't be a big deal. I told her I wouldn't leave to the couch. I'd stay beside her in the bed. But I was wrong. I couldn't even last one night. We both fell asleep without incident. I don't know how many hours passed, but I woke up in the dark with the sensation that someone was watching me. And then I remembered. She was with me. She was actually spending the night. I smiled. But then I noticed the shadowy outline of her sitting up on the bed. She was looking down at me. Staring. It creeped me out. I'll admit it. Her posture was entirely different. It was as though it wasn't even her at all. Then she spoke. It wasn't her voice that I heard. It was much lower and gravelly. Like something out of a horror movie. "I'll chew the skin from your bones." She said that. I froze. At first, I just kept looking at her. This was not at all what I expected. I thought it would be more like the way Tourette's is often portrayed. Just random swearing and shouting. I honestly thought to myself, what will I do if she attacks me right now? What if she really does try to chew the skin from my bones? But then she just lied down and went back to sleep. I was creeped out. I tried to lie back down and ignore her, but struggled. I couldn't even close my eyes without thinking maybe she's sitting up again and staring at me. And then one time I rolled over to look at her, and she was. Her face was pressed right towards mine. Her breath was foul and rotted. Something that was most certainly not normal for her. She spoke again, in the same voice as before. "If you don't move to the couch, you'll be dead by morning." That did it for me. I sat up in a moment and headed for the living room. She made some sort of wheezing sound as I left. I think it was supposed to be laughter. I was lying on the couch, but I wasn't going to be able to fall back to sleep. I was far too shaken. I was staring out towards the window, hoping to see the first few hints of the sun rising. And then I thought I heard something. From the bedroom. I listened. And then I heard it again. "Stephen." It was that same low and gravelly voice. It sounded like a witch. I tried to just ignore it at first. But then it continued. "Stephen." Still I said nothing. "I know you can hear me, Stephen. You're awake now. Why don't you come back into the bedroom?" The voice barely sounded human. "Or maybe you'd prefer if I come to you." I still didn't say anything. I was told not to. But I listened. If I heard her start walking towards the bedroom door, I'm not even joking, I would have run right out of the apartment. But she had asked me not to respond to her sleep talking. So I didn't. And then I heard her once more. "Sorry if this spoils your plans." She began laughing. "The two of you were supposed to walk that trail again," she started. I wasn't even remotely prepared for what she'd say next. "You'd both be so tired when you'd reach the top. You'd look over the city. Then you'll get on one knee and bring out the ring." She began laughing. I tried to just ignore it at first. But then it continued. "Stephen." Still I said nothing. "I know you can hear me, Stephen. You're awake now. Why don't you come back into the bedroom?" The voice barely sounded human. "Or maybe you'd prefer if I come to you." I still didn't say anything. I was told not to. But I listened. If I heard her start walking towards the bedroom door, I'm not even joking, I would have run right out of the apartment. But she had asked me not to respond to her sleep talking. So I didn't. And then I heard her once more. "Sorry if this spoils your plans." She began laughing. "The two of you were supposed to walk that trail again," she started. I wasn't even remotely prepared for what she'd say next. "You'd both be so tired when you'd reach the top. You'd look over the city. Then you'll get on one knee and bring out the ring." She began laughing. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a problem with sleep talking. It was something much more. Something supernatural. I had never told anybody about my proposal fantasy. There was simply no way she could have known about any of it. This was no longer about merely talking in one's sleep. This was about possession. I can't go back into the bedroom. I have no idea what would happen if I did. Instead, I'm going to wait it out, holding up in my living room until the sun rises. I have a couple more hours yet. I can hear her laughing occasionally in the bedroom. It's still not her voice. Still that same low-pitched cackle. But as I sit on my couch writing this out, here's what scares me the most. Maybe my infatuation and utter obsession with her wasn't normal. I said before that I felt like I was losing control of myself. More so, I believe, than the typical falling in love story. No. I fear that the infatuation I felt was the entity slowly taking control of me. Of it controlling my thoughts, fears, ambitions, and anxieties. Maybe once I become completely absorbed, a transfer would occur, and she would be free of it. I know I should leave. That I should open the front door, get in my car, and drive away from here. But I can't. I can't leave her. I've already lost control. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. Story 2. Last night, I got a reCAPTCHA. There was something horribly wrong with it. Have you ever seen a photo reCAPTCHA? Instead of a checkbox, it's a low-quality photo split into 16 square sections. It'll say something like, select all squares with street signs, and you have to click every square that contains a street sign. At 11 p.m. on Sunday night, I got one while downloading free stock images. It was a photo of a path through the forest. Select all squares with people. Okay. That was easy enough. In the center, there was a jogging woman in pink shorts. She took up a few of the middle squares, and I clicked them all. I pressed verify. It didn't work. Select all squares with people, the message said again. I took off my glasses, placed them on the table, and squinted at the image. No. She wasn't the only person. Several feet off the trail, at the very edge of the image, I could see it. The edge of an arm clad in a black sweatshirt, with a pink thumb poking out. I triumphantly clicked the 2 squares containing it. Verify. The image blinked as it refreshed. Then the same text popped up, as if to taunt me, select all squares with people. I rubbed my eyes and stared at the image. The trees cast low resolution, blocky shadows across the path. The woman's ponytail swung to the left, mid-motion. Patches of yellow sunlight dappled the surrounding forest. I studied some of the darker shadows, far from the path, but none of them matched the silhouette of a person. I glanced to the edge of the image. No. The image had changed. The arm at the edge of the photo was now further in the frame, taking up 3 squares instead of 2. Bulky shoulders and dark jeans followed it. And the jogger was just slightly further down the path, as if she'd just taken a step. The touchpad was slick under my fingers. My heart pounded in my chest. Slowly, I dragged the cursor over the 3 squares and clicked them all. Verify. The image blinked. Select all squares with people. I leapt back from the computer. The image was different again. The man was further in the frame, taking up 5 squares. His hand was stretched out towards the jogger, just inches from her shoulder. And the jogger. She was turned towards him, eyes wide. Mouth open in a silent scream. Click, click, click. I furiously clicked all the squares. Verify. Loading. Select all squares with people. The man's face was finally in frame. The hood of his sweatshirt was pulled tightly over his head. A translucent Halloween mask poked out from underneath, pressed against his features. His hand was latched onto her arm. She was screaming. Click, click, click. Verify. The image disappeared. I'd passed the reCAPTCHA. I reported what I'd seen to the police. At first they thought I was crazy, but as I gave a detailed description of the images, they frantically took notes and asked me questions. The woman matched the description of a local woman, Kaylee Johnson. She went missing a week ago, during an afternoon jog on the wooded Lakewood Trail. She was never found. Story 3. Man knocked on my door at midnight. He gave me a horrible choice. Today marks my 40th birthday on this earth, and rather than contemplating how to deal with the typical midlife crisis, I'm deciding whether or not my time here has ended. It's sort of a family curse. For as long back as my family tree stretches, the men of the family never make it past the age of 40. It even goes as far as saying each of them have died, exactly on their birthday. At least that was the case for my father. I was in the middle of college when I got the call. They'd found the athlete of a man, lying dead on the front porch from an apparent heart attack. On his 40th birthday. My uncle suffered the same fate a couple of years later, as did my brother, who died about 5 years ago. Based on the evidence, I'd say there's some merit to the supposed curse, but as with every rule, there's an exception. In this case, it's my granddad. Even as a kid, I always looked up to him, not only vertically, but as a role model. In fact, our birthdays were only a few days apart, so we usually saw each other around that time. He had this aura surrounding him, like an invisible shield that prevented anything malicious from getting too close. Everything he did with purpose, and with an undying smile on his face. Only once did he ever break his perfect facade, at my father's funeral, but even then he seemed more disappointed than he did sad. Year 0, that's what he called his 40th birthday. For him, it marked the true beginning of his life, creating jokes about his age, claiming he just turned 5 years on his 45th birthday, and so on. Once I reached adulthood, his demeanor changed ever so slightly, as he approached me for what he called some manly advice. He sat me down, handed me my first official beer, and started talking. After what happened to your father last year, I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about this so-called family curse. It's not false that all men seem to simply die on their 40th birthday, but it's wrong to call it a curse. In fact, it's more of a blessing in disguise. He took a deep breath before continuing. It's going to sound a bit crazy, but I'll tell you anyway. On your birthday, once you turn 40, a man will come knocking on your door at precisely midnight. Despite the odd hour, you'll feel compelled to let him in. Don't worry, he won't come to harm you, he just wants to talk, and once he has said what he wants to say, he'll offer you a choice. What choice? What's he going to tell me? I asked, confused as to how words could have caused all these deaths. That, I can't tell you, it's something you have to find out for yourself. All I can do is warn you, and tell you to live your life to the absolute fullest, for as long as you can. He never brought it up again, and though it always lingered in the back of my mind, I couldn't bring myself to actually believe it, but I did as he said, and tried to enjoy each aspect of life, believing that once I turned 40, I'd surely perish like the rest of my family. Which brings us to today, my 40th birthday. At precisely 12 o'clock, midnight, I awoke to what sounded like 3 soft knocks at the front door. My wife, the lightest sleeper on the planet, didn't even seem to register the intruding noise, while I myself, a usually heavy sleeper, awoke with a startle. I hadn't been sleeping well the days prior to my birthday, anticipating the end of my life, yet unable to believe it. Wearing nothing more than my pajamas, I made my way to the front door. With slight hesitation, I looked through the peephole. On the other side, stood a middle-aged man in a suit, with a friendly smile on his face. Mr. Shepherd, he greeted me as he shook my hand. Mind if I come in? Speechless, I could do little more than a gesture for him to enter my home. I'd made up my mind long ago to deny him entrance, yet I felt compelled by his presence. He walked past me and headed straight for the kitchen, seeming to already know the layout of my home, a house I'd inherited from my father. I followed him obediently into the kitchen, and we sat down at the table. He just kept staring at me without speaking a word, his smile never leaving his face. I had a lot of questions, but I couldn't bring myself to ask a single one. We simply sat in silence, looking across at each other, like an awkward and equally twisted blind date. You seem surprised to see me, the man finally said after minutes of silence. I'm assuming you expected my visit? I nodded my head, still unable to speak. Come on, Mark, you have a perfectly functional tongue. At least your wife seems to think so. Don't be embarrassed to use it. Why are you here? I eventually asked. His smile vanished, replaced with an expression of utter confusion. Why I'm here? That's the question you want to start with? Not who I am, or what I did to your father. I didn't respond, and he stared into my eyes, not moving a muscle. As you wish, he sighed. I'm here to talk, to tell you the answers to each and every question you've ever had. Anything you want to know, I will tell you, no matter how stupid or bizarre of a question it is. I promise you nothing but truth. Did you kill my father? Of course not, that's entirely against the rules. I simply gave him a choice, and like all the men in your family, save for your brilliant granddad, he chose to leave. What choice? Ah, Mr. Shepard, or Mark, do you mind if I just call you Mark? Before I could answer, he just went on talking. That's the beauty of our little meeting. I will tell you the answer, but not until I believe you're ready. He leaned back in his chair and waited for me to keep asking questions, though from the smug look on his face, I could tell he knew exactly what I'd ask. Who are you? Come on, Mark, you don't really have to ask that, you already know, don't you? I had my theories, and as dumb as I felt they were, it couldn't possibly beat the ridiculousness of the family curse. Are you Satan? I asked nervously. Technically, that's correct, but let's not resort to name-calling. I prefer Lucifer, he chuckled. Once again he fell silent, awaiting my next question, but I couldn't organize the thousands of thoughts flowing through my head. You're really bad at this, you know? Not that it makes a difference. I know exactly what you want to know. You don't even have to speak. So, how about we start with something innocent? He stared deep into my eyes, digging through my brain looking for questions I didn't even know I had. Ah, you want to know if your ex-girlfriend still thinks about you? Julia, that's her name, yes? I nodded automatically. She doesn't, and you weren't that special to her, in spite of the pedestal you've put her on. You really should appreciate your wife more, she's far more suited for you. My wife, I'd completely forgotten she still lay upstairs sleeping. As easy as she was to wake up, she'd surely be suspicious of what the hell I was doing awake with a strange man, in the middle of the night. Could we maybe go somewhere else? My wife is sleeping, and I said before being cut off. Mark, don't be ridiculous, your wife can't hear us. Actually, she's a really light sleeper. He stood up from his chair before screaming. Oh, Hannah. I'm talking to Mark in the kitchen. I'm just about to tell him all the secrets of the universe, and if you come downstairs I'll tell you too. He then sat back down and listened for any commotion coming from the room, nothing but silence. I think we're good. By then, most of the adrenaline had settled in my body, and I started to grasp the more advantageous aspect of our conversation. I could ask literally anything, and he'd answer me, but I still needed more proof he was for real. Just before my father died, he told me something I've never told anyone else. I didn't understand it at the time, but when he died the next day I couldn't stop thinking about it. He paused for a moment, giving me just enough time to doubt him. Be a better man than me, Mark, he said, but the voice I heard was the one of my father. My heart raced at the familiarity, and Lucifer just smiled in return. All doubt had been stripped away from my mind, so I decided to ask something more otherworldly. If you're real, then surely God exists as well, heaven and all that? He looked truly disappointed in my question. Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry. Sorry about what? To answer your question. Of course he's real, him in heaven and the other truly magnificent creations emerging from his holy powers, but you didn't think he actually created you, did you? He didn't? I stuttered. No, not at all, you, humanity, you're nothing more than an unfortunate side effect of God's actual creations. You really think something so horrific could be created by an almighty being? Think about it, Mark. You creatures wage war on anyone even slightly different than yourselves. You hoard all of your ultimately pointless possessions, letting some rot in poverty while some thrive beyond what's even remotely necessary. You kill for fun, and in the end you'll destroy the planet, your own home, just because you're all too selfish to take care of each other. That doesn't sound like something God would create, does it? His words sunk through me, like an anchor had been attached to my soul and tossed into the deepest part of the ocean. There are good people here too, it's not all that bad. I argued. You're right, there are plenty of good people around here, but none of them are truly great. Not a single one of you is able to see the bigger picture. He stood up from his chair and started to pace around, as he lectured me on the futile nature of human beings. In the grand scheme of things, nothing you ever do here matters. In the end you'll all turn to dust floating around in the empty void you've so affectionately called space, he finished. I felt crushed. I thought of my wife, the fact that we'd both one day die, and whatever feelings we had would be erased as the meat on our bones rotted away in the ground. Our jobs, working to provide a function for society, all of it was a pointless task, only serving to extend the inevitable end of our world. So what happens when you die? He finished my question for me. Yeah, do we end up in hell? No, you just stop existing. The little fragment of divine power within you, the one you think is worth to be called a soul, is harvested by my workers. We need the fragments to make more desirable beings. He paused, reverting his attention towards my fridge. You'll probably need a few minutes to process. Do you have anything to eat? He helped himself to some cold chicken casserole my wife had cooked as a pre-birthday dinner. So, what do you do then, since God has left, apparently leaving you behind with the rest of us? He laughed with his mouth full of chicken, a few pieces of meat flying across the room. I didn't stay behind. I choose to remain here. Someone has to make sure you guys don't revolt. You guys keep taking things that don't belong. It's only a matter of time before you figure out how to cross over. It's actually way easier than you might think, and while I'd love nothing more than a revolution, I can't leave just anyone in charge to lead it. He dug through the casserole in a matter of seconds, loudly chewing through the meat, almost moaning in pleasure as he did. Your wife truly is a wonderful cook, Mark. Remember to thank her for me. What do you want from me anyway? I asked. I want to offer you a choice. Before I could clarify, the walls around us started to dissolve, the ground cracked beneath our feet, and every piece of furniture not stuck to the wall fell through the ground. I stood up in panic and looked at Lucifer with pleading eyes, but we didn't fall with the rest, we simply floated. It wasn't long until the world around us had been erased from existence, and we stood in a gray, empty void. Where are we? I stuttered. Give it a minute, he said calmly. Buildings appeared all around us, tall, modern architectural masterpieces, colored in bizarre mixtures of silver and blue. All stretching far up into the sky, so uniform, nothing deviating from its neighboring design. This is utopia, Lucifer exclaimed as we suddenly found ourselves on top of one of the buildings. There were no clouds or fog to obscure the view, meaning I could look far into the horizon, seeing that the city truly did stretch on without an end in sight. Utopia, really? Obviously not, this is my city. I made it some 100,000 years ago. It's what you people call purgatory, though I prefer to just call it the place in between, he said. You made purgatory? Yep, it's as close as humans will ever get to heaven. It's the only place that exists on the same realm at the very least. I looked around, the street thousands of feet below seemed so empty, devoid of any people. Where is everyone? In a different section, I keep expanding this place as people flow in. You see, Mark, this is what I offer you. Eternal life in this city, or to be erased by time itself, in a few decades, quick to be forgotten by the world you once lived in. Why? What do you mean, why? God might have given up on humanity before you were even created, but I still see your potential. Unfortunately, your belief in him still stopped most of you from accepting my offer, but you are just in the right state of religious mind to be reasonable. You see, I need you all to believe in the glorious afterlife described in your religious books, just not too much. I could sense the malicious intent behind his offer. If he truly offered eternal life, then surely he wanted something in return. What is this potential you talk about? We're going to take back what's ours, Mark. God sure as hell isn't going to give it to you, but I will, he smiled. Within the next second, I crashed down in my chair, back in my kitchen. Without warning, we'd return back home. That's the choice I offer you, a chance to live in the Silver City, to have a purpose, all of eternity at the tip of your fingers, but that means you'll have to die, today, and come with me. What about my family? I'm sorry, Mark, but they're not ready. Most of them have been poisoned by their upbringing in religious households. Only a few of you are suitable for the job. He looked over at a clock on the wall. Time had passed faster than anticipated, and morning had just arrived. Well, our time is up. You have today to decide. At midnight the deal expires, and you return to your short existence. He started walking out the door, but turned around to give me one final goodbye. Oh, and happy birthday, Mark. Make sure you really enjoy this one. I felt exhausted after Lucifer left. I'd been given the ultimatum of my life. I grabbed a cooler full of beer from the fridge, at 7 in the morning, and sat myself down on the front porch. So, how did the chat go? You did talk to him, right? I just nodded my head in defeat. Why did you choose to stay? I asked. He glanced at the cooler behind me before answering. You got another one of those for me, kiddo? He asked. I handed him a cold one, waiting for an explanation. I met your grandmother when we were just 18. By then my father, and his father before had both left us, so it's safe to say I was aware of the family curse, but though I didn't learn exactly what happened until much later, I promised myself I'd live life to the fullest up until my time came. I figured I would just die like all the others, so imagine how relieved I was when I was actually given a choice to stay. He took a large sip of his beer, almost finishing it in a single gulp. But why would want to stay, if once we die, there's nothing left on the other side? If nothing here matters, then what's the point? Who's to say it doesn't? Just because time here is limited, does that really mean it's not important? Besides, if I have to exist in a place without your grandmother, I'd rather just cease to exist. When we got married, I promised to stay by her side forever, and that's exactly what I intend to do. I looked at my granddad in admiration, 83 years of age, at the end of his lifespan, yet completely carefree, in charge of his own destiny. What about everything else he said? About God, humanity, the place in between? He looked at me for a moment, pondering his next words. You make your own purpose, Mark, don't you ever forget that. We talked until my wife woke up. She made my favorite breakfast, invite both myself and my granddad inside. She showed a genuine sense of joy, and I envied her, living life in ignorance of the horrible truth. I smiled as we ate together, the first time since my meeting with Lucifer. He gave me until midnight to choose whether to stay behind and let history wash me away, or to go with him and forever live in the place in between, to serve in a war against God himself. I'll enjoy this day the best I can. After all, it might be my last. Story 4. My hearing aid picks up horrible sounds that nobody else can hear. Ben? I bawled and blubbered. I could hear the doctor's voice. Following a motorcycle accident in early 2022, I lost my hearing and spent a tumultuous year in silence. I know many unfortunate people endure lifelong deafness, but my 18th year was the hardest of my life. For various reasons that aren't worth discussing, I had to wait a long time to receive a cochlear implant. The 2-week post-surgery wait for my device's activation was possibly the most arduous part of the entire ordeal. I just wanted the doctor to turn on the damn thing. Even as I sat in the hospital on the big day, I didn't believe it would actually work. I was ecstatic to be proven wrong. Yes, I whispered to the doctor. I can hear you. My parents embraced me, and we erupted into a chorus of contented sobbing. My older sister, Beth, looked up from her phone for a brief moment to acknowledge my existence. Does this mean I can't insult the spotty shit to his face anymore? She asked, grinning at me. Beth. My mom huffed. Sorry about that, Dr. Stewart. The old man chuckled. No need to worry, Mrs. Hart. This is an exciting time for all of you, I'm sure. Now, Ben, it's important that we monitor your progress, okay? If you experience any issues with the implant, contact me. I nodded, smiling. I think I'd forgotten that I could actually speak again. Well, obviously, I never lost the ability to speak, but I had been self-conscious about the way my voice might sound. "Thanks, Dr. Stewart," I croaked with tears in my eyes. "I can't wait to listen to Radiohead again." "Lord, give me strength," Beth muttered. As my family and I were gleefully gliding down the long corridors of the hospital, lost in conversation, I disregarded numerous red flags. Overwhelmed by the hospital's cacophony of sound, I didn't pay attention to the noises that only I could hear. It was in hindsight that I realized I'd been overlooking unusual things from the second my implant had been activated. "Where?" I asked my sister. "I didn't say anything, weirdo." "Mom, Ben's ears are broken again," Beth said. I snorted at her sassy quip, though my mom didn't seem to find it quite as funny. Still, I frowned, as I was certain I heard a voice say, "In the doorway." I shook it off, assuming that I just needed to accustom myself to the implant. I thought I'd simply mistaken a voice on the radio for my sister. When we arrived home, there was a welcome party of friends from my sixth form and relatives I hadn't seen in a long time. It was a jubilant occasion. My first ordinary evening in a year. The last ordinary evening of my life. It was on that first night, as I lay in bed, that some unholy breeze seeped beneath my duvet, biting my flesh with frozen fangs. Something was in the room with me. I could feel it. Or, rather, I could hear it. Everyday noises sounded, but they were entirely out of place. Fingernails tapping a wooden surface. Glass clinking glass. Rustling. One particular sound was quite unnerving. Squelching. Footsteps in the muck of our rain-soaked garden. I ran to my bedroom window, looked outside, and saw nothing. But the foreboding footsteps persisted. The doctor had warned that things would sound tinny, but that wasn't what I was experiencing. My family and friends had all sounded robotic as they spoke. The voice in the car and the footsteps in the mud, however, had a distinctness to them more intimate than any sound I'd ever heard, even before losing my hearing. It was at that moment I recalled my walk through the hospital. Every noise, whether it had been my mother's voice or clacking computer keys, sounded slightly muffled and distorted. And yet, a silky smooth voice had been buried somewhere in the mix. I just hadn't been able to distinguish the words over the racket. I sat upright in my bed and listened to the paced, purposeful footsteps. I did consider that a noisy neighbor might be strolling through their own squelching garden. I considered that I'd simply gained superhuman hearing. Eventually, the footsteps ceased, and I lay down, tucking myself beneath the duvet and closing my eyes. In the doorway. My toes curled until the nails had burrowed painfully into my flesh. It was the whispery voice that I had heard in the car. It sounded as if it had been whispered directly into my ear. My eyelids flew open. I sprang to a sitting position. There was nobody in the room. But I know what I heard. It wasn't an implant glitch. It wasn't the radio. It was a real voice. I started to hyperventilate, my skin itching under the weight of the invisible eyes that watched me. To an outside observer, all of this might be easily explainable, but I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. There was a real and present danger in that room. I didn't get any sleep. I sat in the dark for hours, eyeballing my bedroom wall. When I finally heard my sister stroll across the landing to get ready for work, I exhaled. I was still quivering, but at least I wasn't alone. She knocked on the door and entered without waiting for a reply. "How'd you sleep, dickhead?" she asked. "Any problems with the implant?" Heart still racing, I feigned a smile and shook my head. "I heard your deep, masculine snores from the other end of the landing. It's working perfectly." Beth smiled and leant calmly against the doorframe. "Jokes aside, I missed our dumb chats. God, it's good to be able to talk to you again, Ben." I smiled, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes, and looked up to reply to my sister. To my horror, I found myself looking at a hand on Beth's shoulder, a decaying, mere fleshless hand. Seemingly detached from any visible body, it tightly clenched my sister. "You all right, little man?" she asked. wincing and clutching her shoulder. "You look a bit pale. Maybe you dash." Before my sister could say another word, the frightful fingers tightly clawed into her body and tugged. Beth was torn backwards, wrenched by a phantom force, and she tumbled over the banisters on the upstairs landing. I screamed and ran out of my room, only to find myself standing at the top of the stairs, faced with a sight I cannot scrub from my memory. My sister's body lay crumpled and disfigured at the foot of the staircase. My parents quickly emerged, screeching incoherently for help. As I stood there, transfixed by the horror of events unfolding around me, I felt something haunting, a hand on my own shoulder. Words tentatively trickled into my ear. "It's not polite to eavesdrop, Benjamin."